Jeff Paterson is our Canucks reporter, the host of RinkWide Vancouver. He was a busy boy on the weekend as the Canucks take just one of 4 points available to them. The weekend the music died, Jeff? Or you give them any hope from here?
I'm distracted. Blake had me at talking cars. I was like having Knight Rider flashbacks. So.
I was going to say, what cars talked in the 80s?
The Chrysler New Yorker, your door is ajar. God, it was annoying.
Your team is eliminated from the playoffs. Did you have a car that said that?
No, but we have heard it somewhere before.
The check engine light's been going for a while with this group, and a few other of those warning signs and symbols on the dash. Friday night in Columbus, probably. You can't. You can't, for the third time this season, allow a 3-goal lead to get away. You can't have a 5. For me, the 3-0 in the first period, great start, but there's still a lot of time. It was the 5-3 lead in the third period, though. Go into lockdown, put plywood up across your net. Now, Kevin Lankinen didn't hold up his end of the bargain. Neither did Elvis Merzlikins. I mean, goals were going in. There was that one sequence, Atu Ratu at one end and Matejchuk at the other, and those were both imminently stoppable pucks, and it was just one of those nights. But unfortunately for the Canucks, been a few too many of those nights through the season. I did a mailbag at Canucks Army today, and somebody asked about sort of the through line between these epic collapses. And as I went back and I looked, opening night against Calgary, we all remember what happened the first game out of the Christmas break against Seattle, and then Columbus the other night, 3 different goaltenders. You can't pin it on one of them. Still was an opening night, Demko against Seattle, and this one was Lankinen. So needed saves there, loose coverage defensively, abandoning all the staples and structure and all the other buzzwords that Rick Tocchet had. Look, I thought they played hard in Winnipeg, certainly for 40 minutes. I liked at the end of a road trip, going up against the top team in the National Hockey League with the best goaltender on the planet. They tightened up defensively. They did a lot of good things. They got the lead. Unfortunately, Jets kind of leaned on them in the third period, and ultimately Canucks skate away with the loss there.
A third of your team could be an AHL team, and they played that well, and so they deserve that credit. I mean,
we played the clip earlier. Yeah. What did you make of the goaltending decisions, Jeff?
Yeah, I mean, perfect world, I suppose, and we have the benefit of hindsight here. I would have rode Thatcher Demko into Columbus. I just think that was a game that was there for the taking. He was playing well. He had come off wins in Jersey and the Island against the Islanders, had days off between. Now, not out of the road, and we don't know. Remember, he hadn't played in 6 weeks, so maybe some of that was Thatcher Demko saying, give me a little rest here, and I'm ready to take on the Jets on Sunday. But every point matters. And clearly there were 2 points there in Columbus waiting for them, and especially the way that game unfolded. I think I would have gone Demko there, tried to get 3 straight wins, and then step into the ring, take your best swing against the Jets the way that they did at home a couple of weeks ago. Lankinen was in goal that night. So, was it a misstep? Maybe a little bit, but ultimately not armed with all of the information that the coaching staff has here. Just if we're playing the armchair quarterback game, I think I would have stuck with Demko in Columbus.
And it's tough when you can find the points so close by, right? It's one thing to regret the points in November and December. 2 in New York, the 1 in Columbus. It's right there, and that changes the forecast for this team. If they've got 3 more points at this stage, I mean, they still have to take care of business if they have those 3 more points. But that's a big 3-point swing on one road trip.
Yeah, and it's just kind of weird the way the road trip unfolded, that they rediscovered their offense minus top guys and with these plug-and-play players from Abbotsford. And so where for so long it was they just couldn't find that second or third goal on a given night, here they scored up until the Winnipeg game, but just got a little loose defensively. And I guess that's a little bit of a surprise to me. And some of it, guys, is we have reached that point in the program here where it is now abundantly clear playing Quinn Hughes 30 minutes a night isn't a strategy.
No.
It's just not. As good as he is, and as much as he means to this team, he too has limits. And we've reached those. I think the last 3 games, quite frankly, and this is not a knock on Quinn, but I think the last 3 games, go back to the Island, Columbus, and Winnipeg, 3 of the most ineffective games for the Canucks' best player. And no surprise here. When you look at the workload in another 28-minute night in Winnipeg or afternoon in Winnipeg, guys, I was looking at this with Quinn's workload before the Four Nations break. So really the first 4 months of the season. Remember, Philip Hronek was gone for 6 months, or 6 weeks. But they started the year with Juleson and Desharnais and, a mix. So this is up until the Four Nations break. Quinn was averaging 25 minutes and change. Since the Four Nations break, and we know that he didn't play in the Four Nations because he wasn't anywhere close to healthy enough. Since then, his average ice time in 13 games is 26 minutes and 32 seconds. So he has added a minute and a half to his workload since the Four Nations break, but also since Philip Hronek returned to the lineup and they added Marcus Paterson. Like, the whole idea here was to insulate Quinn Hughes, beef up this blue line. They've overhauled the blue line in season, and you're asking Quinn to play 90 seconds more per night. And of course, he played 4 minutes and 10 seconds of overtime the other night in Columbus. It's just too much. It's too much. And they're not maximizing. He wasn't the best player on the ice on a lot of nights in this road trip. And again, that's not a knock on him. He's given them everything he can, but the power play has gone quiet. That was part of the road trip story as well, that the game in Columbus was the only game of the 6 that the Canucks managed to score on the power play, and they got 2 against the Blue Jackets and still didn't win that hockey game. So moving forward here, among the many things that the Canucks have to sort out in the offseason is a strategy to maximize Quinn Hughes, but not run this guy into the dirt, and that's what they've done here. And I'll be really interested to see if he plays all 8 of the remaining games on their schedule.
Coaches usually play to the bitter mathematical end, so I suspect that will be the case. But do you think that's the one spot where maybe Rick Tocchet slows down just a little bit, like 24 minutes for Quinn Hughes? Is that the one place where he can say, hey, I'm not going to run this guy into the ground or risk injury for the player, for God's sake? Because that's my worry, is that he's lost his nimbleness, his creativity is diminished because I think he's exhausted. And if he got injured right now, my goodness, it would look bad on the Canucks, I think, running him out for 30 minutes a game.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of ways to look at this. They've got 6 of their final 8 on home ice. I think it's been such a disappointing year at home that the paying customers deserve to see Quinn Hughes to some degree. If they chose to leave him at home entirely from that Dallas-Columbus or Dallas-Colorado road trip, he's no longer playing for the Norris. He's not playing for the Hart. I could see a world where you could carve out that sort of strategy, and you're right, limit his ice time in the other games, but those games, unfortunately, aren't going to matter to the Vancouver Canucks. So, yeah, I mean, I think, we got no information whatsoever when this team was out on the road here about, like, are we going to see Elias Paterson or Nils Höglander or Philip Chytil again this year, or any of those guys shut down with 8 games to go? We'll get a little bit of clarity, I think, when the team gets back to the practice rink on Tuesday. And these are now legitimate conversations for the Vancouver Canucks to have, and for us to have about the Vancouver Canucks, is who needs to play, what are you getting out of some of these guys, and the way that some of these younger guys are stepping in and seizing the opportunities, quite frankly, they're actually quite a likable bunch right now. Like, I'll give the Vancouver Canucks that much with the effort level. They don't go quietly, not enough wins in the big picture, but I'm kind of more intrigued to see what Aatu Räty could do with 8 more games at the NHL level, or, Linus Karlsson, I thought, had a nice road trip. The one guy that I want to see more from, quite frankly, like the Jersey game, we all came out of the Jersey game and it was Jonathan Lekkerimäki's world, right? I mean, that was the only goal that he scored on the road trip, and really otherwise, okay, the shootout goal too, the same night, but a little quiet the rest of the way. And that's to be expected with a 20-year-old still finding his way in the National Hockey League. But he only had 5 shots in the 5 games that he played. The power play was quiet, as we said. So, if they can keep all these guys up, a few of them are up on emergency recalls, but the ones that can stay, play them. And let's see what they can do with the final couple of weeks of the season.
Well, he said he wanted to get Lekkerimäki more minutes, but needed to find chemistry with a centerman. We talked about it last week. There wasn't really a centerman to play with, a gifted offensive winger. Although I must say I was a little surprised he didn't shoot earlier in the shootout on Friday, Jeff. Like, coming off the glorious shootout goal, I would have thought he would have been your first or second guy in the queue against Columbus.
Yeah, I saw a lot of noise on socials about the selections. I had trouble getting too worked up there. Jake DeBrusk had scored in Jersey, had scored earlier this season, and your leading goal scorer. Brock Boeser just is one of those guys throughout his career has not been much of a shootout guy. So people were like, well, but he's got 24 goals. Yeah, but sometimes some players just aren't cut out for shootouts. Pia Suter had the opportunity in New Jersey. He didn't score. Connor Garland in his career, when he got traded to Vancouver, guys, I remember he was like right up there with Jonathan Taves among active players and their shootout conversion rate. He just hasn't had many opportunities here because there were a lot of guys in front of him. So, I do think that the coaches go by the numbers more than an in-game hunch and this idea of riding a hot hand because people were saying, Ratu had scored twice in the game in the third period. Why wouldn't he go? We don't know how deep you would have to go in a shootout to see Ratu, but really, my issues with Friday night run a whole lot deeper than the batting order in the shootout. They should have won that game and won it going away much earlier than it ever getting to overtime or the skills competition. But, was it the New Jersey game where Rick Tocchet gave credit to Marco Terenius for his work as well? And so, some of the things that go into shooter selection, I think, are things that maybe the average fan just doesn't see and isn't privy to all of the conversations that go on behind the scenes.
Some people were taking issue with just the ferocity late in the game yesterday versus the Jets after they went up 3-1, that there wasn't any pushback. Do you think, given that this is a pretty diminished team, like if it's the same skaters that are available because the injured players are not coming back, do they let down now when they know that they're right up against the mathematical wall here? Do you think the Canucks have any fight left? And again, it's not because, hey, they can still make the playoffs necessarily, but, is there a risk here where they lose a bunch of games because, the fight is officially over?
Well, sure, for that reason, but also starting on Sunday night, and Sunday is back-to-back, you got Vegas, you've got Dallas, you've got Colorado, you got Vegas again. The schedule doesn't let up for the Vancouver Canucks. Like Seattle and Anaheim at the outset of this three-game homestand, those seem like the gettable games, but we've had this conversation too. Having watched this season unfold, is there such thing as a gettable game for the Vancouver Canucks? And so, Anaheim is pushing to the late stages here, and good young team that's moving in the right direction that the Canucks are going to have to be mindful of over their shoulder in the years to come. Seattle is kind of spinning its wheels and has all season, but I'm sure the Kraken will come in here. They've beaten the Canucks 2 out of 3 on the year and then had that massive comeback in December. So, I think that, yes, a letdown is possible. How does Kevin Lankinen bounce back from really his worst game of the season whenever he gets the net again? Because he just wasn't good enough, obviously, in Columbus the other day. And, we'll see where it goes from here. But again, this idea that, now you're looking at some of your younger guys to really see this as an opportunity, maybe be a little selfish. And I don't mean that as a bad thing, but, see it as an opportunity for them to showcase what they can do over the final 8 games to sort of leave a message for the management and the coaching staff that they want to be part of this next season. And as to the late push in the third period, I don't know how it all works out. We know that building an NHL schedule is a Herculean task, but how exactly did the Vancouver Canucks wind up their 2 games in Winnipeg at the tail end of a 5-game road trip in January and a 6-game road trip here in late March? That was always going to be a tough task and a big challenge for the Vancouver Canucks. But at the tail end of this trip, as they're running out of bodies, and I just think the gas tank was empty, and Quinn was sort of the poster boy for that. He didn't have his offensive good stuff yesterday, and that's fine. This guy's laid it all on the ice all season long. And really, I think yesterday kind of the one opportunity where Teddy Bluger, of all people, had the chance to tie the game 2-2, had probably the best look for the Vancouver Canucks in the third period. Connor Hellebuck swats that one away, and the Jets go back down the ice and score, and ultimately pull away from the Vancouver Canucks. The Jets' best players were just a little bit better than the Canucks' best players yesterday. Hellebuck outdueled Demko. Kyle Connor was probably the best skater and was in on 2 of their 3 goals. A relatively quiet afternoon for Boeser and DeBrusk and Garland, and those are the guys that you're going to have to look to if you're the Vancouver Canucks. And so, end of the day, the Winnipeg Jets do what they do, 51 victories. Connor Hellebuck gave up 1 goal over the weekend, guys. Had the shutout against Jersey on Friday, and they were lucky maybe in some ways to get the 1 on him, although Pia Suter rang that one off the post in the first period as well. So Pia Suter was going, but not enough guys ultimately at the tops of their game at the tail end of a a long and onerous road trip.
Yeah, Hellebuck back in the Hart Trophy conversation. He hadn't actually been great from New Year's on through the Four Nations break, but boy, he's been sensational here of late. As you know, Jeff, what's at stake, or how do you see the final 8 games playing out in terms of Tocchet's future, Jeff?
Well, I suppose when they're mathematically eliminated, at that point, the temperature is going to go up a little bit. He's had this insulation of, I'm locked on the task at hand, and totally fine. I'm prepared to ride with that. But when they're mathematically eliminated and those questions come, he can't say, I'm still focused on these games, even though there'll be a few on the schedule. And they may be another week, guys, before they're mathematically eliminated. But I think this organization owes it to the fan base to get this sorted out and let the consumer know the direction of the hockey club, and don't let this thing linger. And they've already raised ticket prices for next year. And in return, people are getting new comfy seats at Rogers Arena, and that part's fine. But I think people really, the paying customer wants to know who's going to be calling the shots. What is this team going to look like? And we've said this all along. Like, can Rick Tocchet and Elias Paterson coexist? In their current forms. We don't know if Elias Pettersson is going to get his good stuff back and hit the ground running, but there's certainly been frustration, I think, on the part of the coach as he's tried to guide this team towards the playoffs with a star player that has so woefully underperformed this year. Does Rick Tocchet ultimately want to be here? I do believe when he has said, I want to see this through. I want to finish what I've started here. And I don't know if that means winning a Stanley Cup. That's the ultimate goal, obviously. But I do think that Rick Tocchet wants to move this forward and have more seasons like they had last year, certainly. So it's been frustrating. It's been challenging. Has to be disappointing. But my fear is that this is going to get into some sort of protracted contract negotiation that is going to play out for a while the customer is just saying, what am I buying into next year? Because ultimately the Vancouver Canucks have to sell to the fan base. They have not put a great product on the ice in the home games, particularly this year. Low event, low scoring. I'm not sure that people walk out of the building thinking they're getting their money's worth on a lot of nights. And the hockey club has to be mindful of that. They do. They're sort of at a precarious point in time right now where they have to remind themselves that people are paying big bucks. They are in the entertainment business ultimately, and they just haven't been a terribly entertaining team. So if you're ratcheting up the ticket prices, to what end? What product are you putting forth next year? And I think you owe it to your consumers sooner rather than later to give them a truer sense of what you might. I mean, the roster is not going to be filled out until July. I get that. But in the short term, I think people want a better sense of who's going to be behind the bench, who's calling the shots, and what might this team look like in terms of its style of play next season.
If you have tickets on either of these 3-game homestands, though, I mean, if you're a massive Brock Boeser fan, you're going to see him and say goodbye to him probably, aren't you? I mean, there's going to be some changes here on this roster.
Yeah, and as we've talked about, P.S. Suter jacking his rate, and good for him with his performance, stepping into a tough situation with all these guys above him out of the lineup, and he was terrific. Led the club in scoring on the road trip, was consistent. Boeser, led the team in goals on the road trip, had the fantastic comeback buzzer beater in St. Louis, has picked up the pace a little bit here. So, yeah, I thought it was a reasonable trip for Brock. I thought P.S. Suter, Kiefer Sherwood had a nice road trip as well. If I look to guys that ultimately underwhelmed a little on the road trip, Jake DeBrusk scored once, and it was a power play goal the other night in Columbus. Need more from your top end. Connor Garland had just the one goal that banked off him in the blue paint and jersey to force overtime. So it was a key goal, but in terms of making a whole lot else happen on the road trip, there wasn't much there. Dakota Joshua, I like Joshua on that line with Sherwood and Ratu. I think there's something in that trio. But individually, Dakota Joshua had just the one goal against the New York Rangers and would have liked a little bit more from him as well. And then, Quinn, as we said, gives you what he can, just looks exhausted right now, didn't score on the road trip, had 5 assists in the 6 games, but has gone 7 without a goal for, when you take some of those other guys out, Quinn Hughes becomes one of your best options to actually put pucks in the net, not for a lack of trying, had the 9 shots on goal against the Rangers a week ago. But, all of a sudden you get the sense if Hughes and Garland and DeBrusk and Joshua it becomes a pretty thin list of guys that you can actually expect and bank on to contribute offensively for the Vancouver Canucks. So credit to the guys that stepped up on the road trip. They did spread the scoring around, but it got a little thin at the top of the lineup from some of the guys that you would like to have seen just a little bit more from.
All right, Jeff. Well, we'll have many more occasions to discuss the summer,
to debrief
and
look
the
forward.
season
Yes.
and what's to come, starting with later this week. So thank you for this, and we'll catch up then.
Yeah, again, team day off Monday after the long road trip, so back to practice, and I do think practice will be worth monitoring just to see if any of these healthy bodies are anywhere close to the sheet of ice.